I've kind of two small questions, so we don't spend too much time on these questions. But so first, you before mentioned just a bit that upon kind of marketers to tell customers what's happening with the data or what kind of
Mhm.
information the company keeps. Do you think the marketers should do it with ads, or do you think they should do it some other way once the customers have downloaded the application? Because I just refer to Apple real quick. Usually, most of their ads recently have been "You're secure with us." All they've been highlighting is their privacy, their Face ID, and how secure everything is, and so on. It kind of gives you a comfort, but also it's not that everywhere you go around iOS you see security, security everywhere, right? So where do you think most marketers should highlight that part?
Oh, I think this goes back to everything we've been saying. It's about using the tools you have, and I mentioned conversations, and this is a good reason to have a conversation to say to someone, "Yerk, we take this seriously, and we've invested in X and Y, and we are 100% secure, or we've got some accreditation that demonstrates that." So I think again that's another message that marketers can use as part of their with whether you weave it into your campaign as part of the messaging or whether you do a standalone campaign. I think that depends on that. The number of customers you're losing sight of through the cookie acceptance. How
Yeah,
big is the problem? And I think you'll find that organisations will the ones that have gone been very strict, and maybe struggling in terms of the visibility of customers will look to legal and legislation and to see, well, how can we make it easier and make it maybe more fair for the company to actually be able to have some visibility and be able to do our jobs, because ultimately they're having one arm tied behind their back, not being able to see what's going on.
makes sense. Yeah, makes sense, definitely. And also, so my other question would be, uh, do you think this new kind of batch of entrepreneurs, either the young entrepreneurs or like these new companies being founded recently, are going to be heavily focused on data security and privacy? Like we can look, for example, at apps like messaging apps like either Telegram or Signal, that they do keep very minimal data on you, but then something like WhatsApp that recently wanted to share information with Facebook kind of triggered a lot of people and left the platform and moved on to either Telegram or Signal. Do you think that's like the next wave of entrepreneurs heavily
Yeah,
focusing on security and
well,
privacy?
I think they have to. I don't think that it will be done by choice and it's a nice to
Hmm.
have. You have to. That has to be in the DNA of your organization and what you stand for. That's what people are looking for, right? So I think the fact, if you're saying we're not holding any data, we don't feel we need that, then okay,
Yeah,
great. That's probably giving maybe some comfort to some prospects, and others maybe going, well, how's it work? What's your business model?
Mhm.
So I think for me, it's very much about you'd be doing this before even you start your marketing activities to understand, well, how are you
makes sense.
managing the data, because think about it, you're building foundations. If you don't have those foundations, then you could get yourself in a real mess. And I think
Yeah,
entrepreneurs out starting out need to spend the time to actually get that right, because if they don't, they'll be exposed and potentially be in a quite serious situation as they move further on and grow their organization.
definitely. We
Yeah.
see that now in 2020,
Mhm.
2021.
2021.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. So,
Yeah.
speaking of Telegram now, they announced a couple of weeks ago that they are launching the ad platform. So they're going to start making money out of it. And so, do you think it's good to be one of the first adapters and placing ads on that platform, or should organizations wait a little bit? Uh, yeah.
I think it depends on their targeting capability and what data they have, what knowledge they have on their customers. Because if your customer is there, your prospect is there, then why not? But you need to do due diligence. So what other advertisers are advertising on there from other industries? It might be conflicting if there's alcohol
Mm.
or industries that are not favouring or not really going to do anything for your brand. So I think there's qualifying questions you have to ask. There's no reason why you can't go first, but you should absolutely be scrutinising what level of data they've got, what insight they've got, what security they've got, and how they manage advertising. But I go through my career, and I always like to be first, just because it creates a story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a PR story. It also then helps to build a culture in your organization of being first. And they're like, "God, we're never first to anything." Well, actually, this time we are, and so it starts to change the mood. People start to believe, well, actually, yeah, we can do things and be innovative or be first. And I think that sends a great statement to the industry and organization. But it has to be managed. You have to know clearly what you're getting into and what the
Mhm.
risks are. And if you don't know what the risks are, then don't do it, because
Mhm.
that could come and bite you quite hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So, talking about the podcast, have you, I don't know, have you placed any advertisements, or you've been in the backstage?
I've worked with lots of media companies who, in terms of digital advertising. So whether it's on display advertising, whether it's app marketing or social media marketing. So I've worked with organisations
Okay.
and their associated media companies to deliver some great campaigns and maybe not some great campaigns.
Yeah. That always. So, now would you consider placing ads on podcast? And, how does differentiate from, YouTube content, like, yeah, videos on YouTube or whatever, or TV, even TV.
It's quite interesting because I mean I've not been advertising on podcasts actually,
Mm.
and I think it's a real opportunity. And the reason I say that is because I always feel that the few podcasts that I've listened to, you're very engaged, you're very interested in the subject matter. It might be a passion of yours. So therefore, if the advertising is highly relevant and complementary to the podcast, then it could, I imagine, it could be a really, really good vehicle to drive awareness and
Mhm.
consideration for sure.
Hmm.
I want to ask something very, very
Much
short.
choice. Sorry, Dennis. Yes.
Yeah, I want to ask. So, do you think that probably on podcasts the ads might be, and I'm pretty sure there's data that might confirm or discard this, but I was just thinking off the top of my head, when you listen to a podcast, it's all kind of audio, right? You're driving, you're walking down the street, you're commuting,
Mhm.
and if an ad starts playing or the podcast host is talking to you about the product, it might seem like a seamless transition to it. So
Yeah.
kind of you don't mind much, and you might be like, "Oh, that might sound cool." Whereas I feel like in YouTube, possibly because the visuals just stop, and now all you have is an ad, either triggers a good response on your brain, or either you're like, "Oh my god, why did this happen right now when it didn't have to?" You know?
Well, YouTube will be quite intrusive, right? You've been told you have to look at this ad before you consume the content that you ultimately want to view.
True.
I like the idea of editorial, and in the and I suppose whether it's the host talking about products, and clearly he's getting commercial value out of it, which again needs to be
Hmm.
transparent. That's quite a nice way because he's built the trust of his audience. They probably have a lot of respect for them, and they probably have fairly loyal and regular listeners. So I think that's a really nice vehicle, not being intrusive, but also probably got lots of good, probably better airtime to be talking
Yeah.
about the product and in its best possible light, rather than some 5-second ad which might be quite intrusive or just not at the same. What's the word I'm looking for? It just disrupts the theme of the
Yeah.
podcast, and they've got to be careful, right? Because the podcast have got to get as many listeners and keep as many listeners as
As
possible
well.
to
Hmm.
True.
to make it commercially viable for advertisers.
Yep. Yep. And so, yeah, also following a bit with podcasts too. We have, forms of content, articles, podcasts, videos. What's the most effective form of content for SEO? What yeah, what helps SEO the most, you think?
Well, I mean, podcasts are obviously content that
Yeah.
good. I think blog content is really important.
Okay.
And again, with lots of relevant information, and it's not necessarily about the product I'm talking about here, but maybe the lifestyle, the experience that this product or service gives you. So, for instance, I did quite a lot of work with a rental company, and we did a lot around cities around Europe and Barcelona actually as a destination, and that proved hugely successful in terms of rankings in SEO for all terms around Barcelona and car rental and experiences, and we saw significant uplift in sales because of it. So it definitely does work, and I think that podcasts would also add to that. I don't think it's just one channel you have to think about here for SEO. It's actually a whole range of channels,
Mhm.
the touch points the customers have experience and utilize, which obviously Google can see through their algorithms and what's going on with your website.
Yeah. And so, do you think short or long content is better?
I think short, and I only say that in the sense of people's attention spans.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
terms of people reading things now. People who. When's the last time you read a newspaper from front to back? You
Never.
take That's right, but you take snippets of content, right? So
Yeah.
you take sentiment, you get to take sound bites, and if you're really interested, of course, you will research that. And yeah, hey, let's take the funnel again, and depending on where the funnel you are in the funnel will depend on how much content you'll consume and how interested you are in, as I say, that product or service. So I think short form will get the interest, and long form will be equally as important as they get deeper into the funnel and deeper into the brand.
Makes
Okay.
total sense.
And so, what would you say the main differences are between large firms and startups when it comes to brand management? Startups have to build it from scratch, and then
Hmm.
so is that easier or harder to manage? What do you think?
Well, I think it's easier to manage now for startups because again, you haven't got necessarily the legacy. You might be a pure play, where larger brands now are struggling, right? Because they're still talking about themselves. They're still talking about the
Yeah.
product. Where startups now are talking about the lifestyle and the problems and the issues that they're solving that customers are facing every day. It's a totally different skill sets, totally different attitude, and they can reach people with digital channels that the other companies are still relying on, maybe traditional media, to find and nurture these customers. So, from my perspective, I think that you see marketplaces as a classic is really starting to hurt large organizations now because of their reach and their scale, and the fact that they're able to bring on so many other smaller cottage industries, entrepreneurs, on a platform that really propels them. So when you say you're doing it on your own, well, actually, okay, but you've got marketplaces that might equally give you that lift that you didn't think you'd be able to get.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's very true because I feel also like that, as Andy mentioned, the big companies just focus on themselves a lot, trying to highlight their legacy always or what they've done before and their track record. Whereas a startup can have a, let's say, deeper emotional connection with the customers.
Hmm.
You know,
Absolutely, and more
really create a
personal and one to
story.
one.
Yeah,
They understand the
Hmm.
technology. They are focused on where they got to go.
yeah,
They're not necessarily fixing stuff. Where large organisations are probably fixing things.
Hmm.
fixing. Yeah,
Lots of people, in large numbers of people in a quite complex matrix organisation, typically, and it becomes difficult. It becomes very difficult. It just becomes very complicated, overcomplicated, in my opinion.
Hmm. And yeah. So, what's the toughest moment in your career, and how did you overcome it?
Oh, toughest moment of my career.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one. I think one of the tough ones was I was working in a partnership with Sony, Sony Ericsson, so doing the
nice.
mobile phones, and I was working with a broadcaster at the time, and working with the Premier League, and we went live with an ad they were the phone company were using the ad, using our content, and it was all we thought it was all approved, and it went out, and it wasn't, and actually the player and the club that were involved saw it and had to and complain, and we had to pull it. And it was several millions worth of advertising spend that went into it, and it got pulled. So it's a very embarrassing, frustrating situation, if I'm honest, because I don't think that we were necessarily as prepared to work with third parties in the same way that we did just working, on our own brand. So that was really difficult, because then when we did go out to the ad with new creative, it just looked awful. It was just terrible, and it's just the moment had gone. How do we get around it? Well, I think it was just being honest and transparent again, as I've always said, and just learn from it. Okay, but just make sure that everybody who needs to know about who's involved in your activity or who it's going to impact is aware and they've approved it, because otherwise it could be a lot of money and time wasted that you could be doing better things.
Nobody wants to see that happening. It's
Nope.
doesn't sound like the ideal situation.
No, it's not. It's not.
But
not at all. Not at all.
real quick, very quick, Andy. Do you think with these new technologies, kind of like project management tools like Asana or etc., it's become easier to know who's involved in a project and make the cross communication much simple and avoid most mistakes?
Yeah, I think it helps. I think it definitely helps. Of course, it all depends on the user and the input of the content and the frequency and the communication. But it absolutely helps. Absolutely helps. I think it's really important because it can be quite complex. And you've seen and heard of all these channels that we have to our disposal. It's not easy, because that brings in maybe lots of different agencies, lots of different teams, lots of different people from legal or brand, and suddenly it quite quickly becomes quite large in terms of number of people involved. So you definitely need those type of kind of planning platforms to help you navigate through some quite complex interactions or campaigns, for sure.
I always ask this to everyone that comes to the podcast. And so what's next in life? What do you want to be remembered for?
What do I want to be remembered?
Another tough one.
If you'd have asked me probably 5 years ago, I'd have said remembered for being a brilliant marketer and providing brilliant experiences to customers and prospects, and showing that we really care. I care. The organisation cares. That's slightly changed, and I think now I want to pass on my experience and my knowledge and make people who want to go into marketing, passionate about marketing, make them a better marketer.
Okay.
That's what I want to
That's
do.
amazing.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
it is amazing.
I feel like I will contact you at some point soon, Andy.
But it's important because I think the textbooks, I think the academics, I think that, yes, it's very easy to talk to people in terms of this is what you should do, but the realities are very different, very different. And if I can help someone, then that would make me happy.
And also, I think it's much better to get help from somebody who's been like 20 years in this field and then seen everything from no technology to better technology. Whereas all these, gurus who are online that tell you buy my classes, buy my courses.
That's right.
I'll teach you to make this, to make that. So
absolutely, yeah.
That's a good one.
Well, so thanks for coming to the podcast.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thanks
Andy.
for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, I guess the first 2 to 3 years of the company was we were still figuring a lot of stuff out, and most of it was just mostly myself doing all that stuff. Last year in 2020, I met this when I was at Berkeley, I met this really kick-ass dude. He was a business student at the Haas School. I mean, he was just graduating from the Haas School of Business, completing his MBA, and he just worked with me for a couple of months on a side project. But then as he was graduating, he kind of just asked me hey, do you have a full-time position available? And one of our advisors at Berkeley kind of said if you think this guy is super smart, why don't you just make him an offer to be a co-founder? And I did. And he ended up rejecting a sponsorship from McKinsey to pay for his MBA and a full-time job offer from McKinsey to take this massive leap of faith in joining the company. And it's just been an absolutely wild ride since he's been on. It's we just complement each other so well, and we have a solid business team, a solid tech team, and we have just a lot more structure in the company. It's starting to look like a real company now, as opposed to just doing stuff on a daily basis.